36 native warriors on horseback surrounded the ranch at dawn, and standing right in the center of that deadly circle was a white man named Elias Whitaker, unarmed, outnumbered, and out of time. Behind him, hidden in the barn, lay a Comanche girl on the edge of death, a girl he had just saved hours earlier. 3 years ago, native raiders killed his wife. So why, today, would he risk his life to protect one of them? Every arrow was drawn, every rifle was ready. One wrong move, and everything would go up in flames. But then the girl stood up, and with her voice barely above a whisper, she said 3 words: "He saved me." And in that moment, the fate of the entire Rio Mesa territory would be changed forever. But to understand why Elias Whitaker stood between death and destiny that morning, you have to go back to the day before. The sun hadn't yet risen over the brittle ridgelines when Elias saddled his horse and rode out to check the east pasture. He didn't expect trouble, just maybe a broken fence or a calf gone missing. His days were quiet now, predictable, empty. His ranch sat on the edge of nowhere, a speck of land battered by wind and silence. There were no children's voices, no woman's laughter, just the creak of wood, the groan of cattle, and the distant echo of memories he wished he could drown. Mary Ann had been gone for 3 winters now, the kind of gone that left a man half dead and still breathing. Elias had once been a man of warmth, of smiles and song. Now he was a shadow wrapped in leather and grit, his heart buried beneath layers of dust and grief. He didn't speak much anymore. He didn't need to. There was no one left to listen. Until he heard the shot. One single rifle crack rolled across the hills like a thunderclap, sharp, close, final. Elias froze. Not a skirmish, not bandits, just one bullet. He should have turned back. Any man with half a brain would have turned his horse around and minded his own damn business. But something in that sound didn't let him go. It wasn't just gunpowder, it was desperation. It was the sound of someone losing everything. So he followed it. Down by the dry creek, beneath a scorched cottonwood, he found her, a Comanche girl, maybe 16, skin pale from blood loss, buckskin torn and soaked red. A bullet lodged deep in her shoulder. She glared at him through fevered eyes, her lips pressed into a thin, defiant line. Even dying, she didn't look afraid. She looked like someone who refused to disappear quietly. Elias's fingers twitched toward the rifle on his back. He didn't hate her. He hated what her people had done. And yet, those eyes. They were the same eyes Mary Ann had when she stood her ground on the porch that final night. The same eyes Elias saw in his dreams. Strong, unbroken. The smart thing would have been to walk away. Let the dirt take her. Let the circle of violence stay unbroken. But Elias wasn't smart anymore. He was just tired. If you were Elias, would you have turned back? Or would Mary Ann's memory compel you forward? Share your thoughts in the comments below. He dismounted slowly. The girl tried to crawl, failed. She muttered words he didn't understand, a warning, a plea, maybe a curse. But she was losing blood too fast. Elias picked her up. She fought, weakly, then went still. She weighed nothing, and somehow she weighed more than all the guilt in his chest. He rode hard, watching every ridge, every shadow. He knew what this meant. You don't take a chief's daughter and expect to sleep peacefully. By the time he reached the barn, her breath was shallow and her skin was burning. She'd die without help, maybe even with it. But Elias had buried one woman already. He wouldn't bury another, not if he could help it. Elias carried the girl straight into his barn, cradling her like something fragile that had already broken once. He kicked the door shut behind him and laid her gently in a pile of fresh hay near the wall. The horses stirred, uneasy, but Elias barely noticed. He was already moving. He grabbed a lantern, lit it with trembling hands, and brought it close to her face. Her eyes were fluttering, her lips cracked. Her breath, shallow and raspy, whistled with each pull. The bullet was deep, just beneath her collarbone, and the wound had already gone purple around the edges. Infection was coming, fast. Elias swore under his breath. He'd seen wounds like this in the war, the kind that didn't give you a second chance. He yanked off his gloves, dumped water into a basin, and stripped off his coat. There was no time to think, just act. He stoked the fire at the back of the barn and thrust a hunting knife into the flames. It wasn't clean, but it would be hot enough to cut, hot enough to burn out the dying. The girl stirred as he knelt beside her. Her hand reached for something, a braid of beads at her side, maybe a charm, maybe a memory. "I need you to be still," Elias muttered. She couldn't understand him. Maybe that was for the best. He found a leather strap from an old saddle and slipped it between her teeth. She didn't resist, but her eyes locked on his like steel. And for 20 long minutes, Elias Whitaker fought death with fire and grit. The knife hissed through flesh. Blood welled. The girl arched her back but didn't scream. She bit hard into the strap, eyes wide and unblinking. Her body trembled. Her breath came in gasps, but she never broke. Elias worked fast, steady hands, surgical focus. He cut, pried, dug, pulled out jagged lead with the tips of old forceps, and slapped down clean cloth to stop the bleeding. By the time he poured whiskey over the open wound and bound it in layers of cotton, his hands were soaked red. His breath came ragged, his knees shook. But she was alive. Barely. She passed out before he tied the last knot. Elias sank back onto his heels, staring at the girl, this stranger, this enemy, and realized something he hadn't let himself feel in years. Hope. Not for peace, not for forgiveness, but hope that maybe, just maybe, he could still do something good in this world, even if it killed him. He didn't sleep that night. Instead, he sat by the barn door, rifle in hand, eyes fixed on the moonlit hills beyond the fence line. Every shadow looked like a rider. Every breeze sounded like hoofbeats. He told himself he was being paranoid, until he heard it. Drums. Faint, distant, but steady. Boom, boom. Elias closed his eyes. War drums. Not random, not ritual, not for show. This was a signal, a march, a message. They were coming. Not a hunting party, not a scouting band, a war party. He stood slowly and walked back toward the girl. Her forehead was slick with sweat. Her chest rose and fell too fast. She was burning up. Elias soaked a cloth in the last of his water and placed it gently on her brow. Her lips moved, whispering something he couldn't make out. A name, maybe? A prayer? Maybe her father's name? He didn't know, but he had a feeling he was about to meet him. He looked down at her, this fierce little ember of a human being, and exhaled. "I don't know who you are," he murmured, "but you've dragged me into something, haven't you?" A gust of wind rattled the barn walls. The horses inside pawed at the dirt. And outside, far beyond the last ridge, the drums kept beating. Steady, slow, inevitable. The drums stopped just before sunrise. Elias didn't have to look out the barn window to know what that meant. They'd arrived. He gripped his rifle tighter as the first hoofbeats pounded against the dry earth. 1, 2, then a dozen, then more. The sound grew like thunder. Dust began to rise beyond the fence. Shadows moved against the morning light. By the time Elias stepped into the doorway, they were everywhere. 36 Comanche warriors on horseback, painted for war, surrounding the ranch in a perfect, deadly circle. Their faces marked in red and white. feathers in their braids, lances in their hands. Every movement measured, silent, like ghosts from a dream too old to forget. They said nothing. At the center of them sat a man on a white stallion, older, broader, with gray streaks in his long black hair and a necklace of bear claws across his chest. His face was stone, his gaze piercing. Chief Waya. Elias didn't need an introduction. The stage is set, but the outcome is far from certain. If you're on the edge of your seat, hit that subscribe button now so you don't miss how this standoff unfolds. The chief raised one hand. The circle tightened. Elias stepped out of the barn slowly, unarmed, hands open, his boots crunching the brittle earth. His rifle stayed behind. He could feel the weight of 36 eyes locked on him, 36 warriors who had every right to kill him where he stood. And still, he walked forward. "I didn't take her," Elias called out. "I found her." The chief didn't blink. "She's inside, hurt bad. I pulled the bullet out. She's alive. That's all that matters." Still silence, still stares. Then a single voice, deep and cracked with age. "You lie." It wasn't anger, it was certainty. Behind him, Elias heard movement, a rustle, a gasp. He turned, and there she was, Nita. She'd pulled herself up against the barn door, wrapped in a blanket, one arm pressed to her bandaged chest. Her skin was pale. She could barely stand. But her eyes, they burned. She took a step, then another, and then, in a voice so soft it barely reached the first row of warriors, she said 3 words in Comanche. "He saved me." The effect was instant. Warriors shifted in their saddles. Some lowered their spears. Some turned to the chief. But one man didn't move. A younger warrior near the chief's left hand, face scarred, eyes dark, hand already on the knife at his belt.
"Chogan." He leaned toward the chief and whispered something, urgent, angry. The chief narrowed his eyes. Elias knew the look. Doubt. He also knew what it meant when a man like Chogan started whispering during moments like this. It meant the truth was inconvenient. It meant somebody was hiding something. But Elias said nothing. He waited, watched. The chief looked back toward the barn. His daughter swayed where she stood, her breath ragged. Elias moved to steady her. 26 arrows immediately trained on his chest. "Don't," the chief said in broken English. "Don't touch her again." 2 Comanche women broke ranks and ran to Nita. They lifted her gently, spoke to her in hurried tones, examined her wounds. One of them peeled back the bandage. Her eyes widened. She looked at Elias, then back at the chief, and nodded. The girl had been treated, carefully. Still, the young warrior, Chogan, wasn't done. He spurred his horse closer to Elias, stopping inches from him. His voice was ice. "She is Chief's daughter. You take her, you die. All white men die." There it was. Not justice, not tradition, but vengeance, raw and personal. And for the first time, Elias understood. This wasn't just about Nita. This was about something deeper, something darker. He glanced back at the barn. She was watching him, eyes wide, burning with something he couldn't name. Not fear, not gratitude, something else, recognition. And in that moment, Elias felt it. The line had been crossed. The moment had passed. There was no more explaining, no more turning back. Whatever happened next, he was in it, all the way. The silence was suffocating. Elias stood in the center of the circle, hands still raised, surrounded by warriors ready to end him at a word. Nita was cradled between the two Comanche women now, her body slumped, but her eyes locked onto her father, Chief Waya, with a kind of desperation that pierced even the dust-laden air. She tried to speak again. Her voice cracked, failed. The older of the two women dipped a cloth in a water flask and touched it to her lips. Nita swallowed, winced, then looked up. Her voice came out raspy, but clear enough to be heard across the circle. Chogan. Just one name, but the way she said it, the weight, the pain, the fury, turned every head in the circle toward the young warrior. Chogan didn't flinch, but his fingers twitched at the hilt of his blade. She said something else, longer this time, in Comanche. Her tone was urgent, accusatory, broken in places by coughs and tremors. But the words were unmistakable, at least to those who understood. Elias didn't, but he didn't need to, because as she spoke, Chief Waya's face changed, from stone to fire, and Chogan, for the first time, looked away. "What is she saying?" Elias asked aloud. No one answered. Nita tried to rise again, but her legs buckled. Elias instinctively stepped forward to catch her. Arrows tensed once more, but this time the chief didn't repeat his warning. He was listening, processing. The older woman, the healer, stood and whispered something into Waya's ear. His jaw tightened, and then the chief turned to Chogan. "You led her into the ambush." It wasn't a question. Chogan straightened. "She lies," he barked. "Fever speaks for her. White man poisons her mind." But there was a tremor in his voice now, and sweat on his brow. The confident predator was unraveling. Nita pushed herself to her knees. "She saw you," the healer said, translating aloud now. "She followed you that night. You left signs for the soldiers." Elias blinked. So that was it. This wasn't just a wounded girl. She was a witness. Chogan's betrayal wasn't about gold. It was about silence. And Elias had unknowingly kept the only witness alive. The entire circle rippled with unrest. 3 warriors rode closer to Chogan, not fast, but deliberate. One placed a hand on the tomahawk at his side. Another gripped a rope. "You speak lies, girl," Chogan snapped. "She is weak, dying. She doesn't know what she saw." But no one moved to agree. The air shifted. Even the horses could feel it. Waya raised his hand. Everyone stopped. He dismounted slowly, the weight of 40 winters and countless battles heavy on his shoulders. He walked toward Elias, not with threat, but with gravity. "You save my daughter," he said in slow, careful English. "I tried," Elias replied. "You not have to." "No." "Why?" It wasn't a challenge. It was a father asking another man, "Why would you risk everything for a girl who should be your enemy?" Elias didn't hesitate. "Because she was dying, and I've watched someone I love die before. I wasn't going to let it happen again, not if I could stop it." Waya looked at him for a long time. Long enough for the wind to pass, for the dust to settle. Long enough for Chogan to know his time was running out. Then, without warning, Chogan shouted something sharp in Comanche and lunged for the bow on his saddle. But before he could pull the string, an arrow whistled through the air. It struck the dirt inches from his foot. Another followed, this one pinning the edge of his tunic to the ground. A warning. 3 warriors were already off their horses. They tackled Chogan to the ground. The struggle was short, brutal, final. Waya turned back to Elias. His expression was no longer fire. It was grief. Not just for betrayal, but for what this meant. His people had been led into a trap by their own blood. And if Nita hadn't survived, they never would have known. The truth is out, but the fight is far from over. What would you do in Elias's boots right now? Tell us in the comments. Every decision counts. Chogan stood between 2 warriors, his face bloodied from a fresh cut,
wrists bound behind his back. But his eyes held no fear, only rage. And that rage wasn't directed at Chief Waya. It burned straight at Elias Whitaker. "You trust this man," Chogan spat, his voice loud enough to echo through the war circle. "He took her, touched her, hid her like some wounded animal. He's not a rescuer, he's a thief!" Gasps rippled through the warriors. Some tightened their grips on spears, others reached for bows. Doubt had returned, and it moved fast, like fire through dry grass. Elias didn't flinch. "I treated her wound," he said calmly. "I didn't touch her. I didn't even speak her name. I saved her life." Chogan laughed bitterly. "So noble," he sneered. "And yet she was in your barn, alone, bleeding, hidden." The accusation didn't need evidence. It fed on fear and fury, and it worked. Even Chief Waya's gaze shifted, hardening slightly. Elias turned to him. "You saw her bandages. You saw how I treated her infection. You know what I did." Waya's expression didn't change, but his silence spoke volumes. Even a chief could waver when his daughter's honor hung in the balance. Nita stirred, groaning from pain. She was barely conscious, but she tried to sit up, tried to speak. Chogan saw it. He saw her weakness and the danger she posed to his lies. He bucked back hard, slamming his shoulder into one of the warriors holding him. The man stumbled. The second reached for his blade, but Chogan twisted free, lunged toward a nearby saddle. His hand dove under the leather flap. Elias's eyes widened. "Gun!" he shouted, but it was already in Chogan's grip. A small cavalry revolver, loaded, ready. He spun, not toward Elias, toward Nita. "You're not gonna ruin everything!" he roared. The pistol cracked once. The bullet whistled past Elias's ear. Dust flew as horses screamed and warriors scattered. In a flash, Elias dove forward, tackling Chogan to the ground. The two men hit the dirt hard, fists flying, knees driving. Chogan's knife came out, slicing a shallow line across Elias's ribs. The pain was sharp, but meaningless. "You should have stayed out of it, Whitaker," Chogan snarled, spitting blood. "She was mine to silence." They rolled through the dust. Elias grabbed a rock, jagged, heavy. He brought it down across Chogan's face with a sickening crack. Chogan's body went limp, still breathing, but unconscious. Elias stumbled to his feet, blood soaking through his shirt. All around him, the world had gone still again. The warrior stood frozen, weapons half raised, watching. Chief Waya stepped forward. His face was stone. "He tried to kill your daughter," Elias said, chest heaving. "You saw it." Waya didn't speak. He walked to Chogan's body, knelt, and examined him. Then he looked at his daughter, pale, trembling behind the water trough. A slow nod. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was belief. Then came the sound no one wanted to hear, a shrill, distant whistle from the hills. Elias turned. Bluecoats. Cavalrymen on the ridge, 24 at least, mounted, rifles aimed, uniforms shining like polished steel in the morning sun. The officer raised a pistol and shouted, "Whitaker, step away from the hostiles!" Elias's blood ran cold. So this was Chogan's plan. He hadn't just tried to kill Nita. He'd baited the trap, lured the Comanche to this ranch, then signaled the army to move in. They weren't here to negotiate. They were here to exterminate. Before Elias could shout a warning, chaos erupted. The Comanche moved fast. Decades of battle instincts kicked in. Warriors split and scattered, diving behind wagons, fence posts, hay bales. Arrows appeared from nowhere, guns cocked, horses redirected. Chief Waya shouted commands in Comanche.
2 warriors grabbed Nita, pulling her behind a water trough. The healer woman followed, crouching low. Elias ran for the porch. He kicked open his cabin door and grabbed his Winchester, his revolver, and every box of ammunition he could carry. He looked back, just in time to see the first volley of bullets slice through the open field. The cavalry had fired the first shot. A warrior cried out as lead tore through his thigh. Another ducked just in time as a post beside him exploded in splinters. But the Comanche weren't running. They were defending. Elias dropped to a knee behind his porch post and fired once, dropping a cavalryman who'd broken from the ridge too soon. And in that moment, everything changed. Elias Whitaker, once a lonely rancher, had just fired on the U.S. Army. There was no turning back. He wasn't just protecting a wounded girl anymore. He was standing between justice and massacre, and he would not back down. The instant Elias Whitaker pulled the trigger, everything changed. The bullet hit the cavalry sergeant square in the chest, lifting him from his saddle like a puppet with its strings cut. He crashed to the ground, unmoving. His horse reared in panic, then bolted down the hill, sending ripples of confusion through the cavalry ranks behind him. For a split second, time froze. The wind stopped. The world went silent. And then, hell opened its jaws. "Return fire!" someone screamed. Rifles thundered from the ridge. Bullets tore through the early light, slicing into fence rails, splintering barn beams, exploding through the siding of Elias's cabin. The air filled with dust, smoke, and the sickening hiss of flying lead. Elias dropped behind the porch post, barely breathing, hands trembling as he slammed another round into the chamber of his Winchester, Sarah's old rifle. The one she'd used to hunt rabbits along the river. The one she cleaned every winter by the fire. The one she held when they last stood side by side. Now it was the only thing between him and death. And he wasn't alone. To his left, Chief Waya moved like a shadow, silent, focused, deadly. Arrows flew from his longbow with terrifying accuracy. Each one found its mark. A horse screamed, a soldier dropped, another turned to run, only to be struck down before he could finish the thought. The Comanche had transformed the ranch into a fortress. Warriors darted between the barn and the corral, using troughs, barrels, even broken wagons as cover. Some fired rifles. Others used bows or tomahawks, flanking the attackers with an instinct honed by generations of war. Behind the barn, a young warrior sprinted with a rope of firewood, lighting a row of smudge pots, creating a smoke screen that muddied the cavalry's aim. It was smart, brutally efficient. Elias leaned out and fired again. One cavalryman fell from his saddle, clutching his thigh. Another lost control of his horse and went tumbling down the slope. The line was breaking, but the attack didn't stop. Inside the barn, Nita lay wrapped in blankets, fever still raging. The healer woman, barely past middle age but calm as stone, pressed another cloth to the girl's forehead. Outside, bullets ripped into the barn walls. Sawdust fell from the rafters. A beam cracked above them, but neither woman moved. Their eyes were fixed only on the girl's shallow breathing. Elias glanced back toward the barn, just for a second. That's when he saw it. Movement in the dirt. A figure crawling low, face down, dragging itself like a wounded animal. Chogan, still alive, still dangerous. Blood ran from a wound on his scalp, and one arm hung limp, but the fire in his eyes hadn't gone out. It had only darkened. No one had seen him, no one noticed him creeping along the side of the barn, inch by inch, toward the open door. Toward Nita. Elias's pulse spiked. He opened his mouth to shout, but the thunder of gunfire swallowed his voice. Chogan was halfway there now, fingers clawing through the mud. His other hand reached for something hidden beneath his belt. A knife, small, sharp, meant for one job. He wasn't aiming for Elias. He wasn't trying to escape. He had one purpose left in his dying body: silence the girl. The girl who could destroy him with just 3 words. Chogan's body slithered through the dirt like a dying rattlesnake, blood soaking the back of his shirt. His hand tightened around the knife as he reached the barn door, only feet from the girl he'd sworn to silence.
Inside, Nita lay motionless, her breath ragged. She didn't see him, didn't hear the slow scrape of his boots across the straw. The healer woman turned, too late. Chogan lurched upright. The knife gleamed in the morning light. Elias was already running. No! He sprinted from the porch, leaping over a broken fence, ignoring the bullets flying around him. His boots slammed into the dirt. His ribs burned from the wound Chogan had given him earlier, but he didn't stop. He wouldn't make it in time. Inside the barn, the healer lunged forward, trying to shield Nita with her body. But before Chogan could strike, thwip! A sharp, clean snap of air, then silence. Chogan froze, eyes wide. He looked down. An arrow, long, black-fletched, had buried itself deep into his chest. The knife dropped from his fingers. He staggered back 2 steps, blood bubbling from his mouth, and collapsed beside the hay. Dead. Elias stopped in the doorway, breathing hard. Standing just behind him, bow still raised, was the youngest of the Comanche warriors, barely more than a boy. The same one Chogan had mocked weeks ago, calling him weak, unworthy of the warrior path. Now his arrow had delivered justice, a warrior's justice. Chief Waya had seen it too. He gave a single nod, not a word, not a cheer, but it meant everything. The tribe had judged its own, and the traitor had fallen. But the battle outside was far from over. More cavalry now charged down the ridge in full force, sabers drawn, shouting war cries drowned by the roar of hooves. The earth trembled beneath the weight of their assault. Elias grabbed the fallen revolver and threw it to the healer. "Stay down," he said. Then he turned and ran back outside. The ranch was ablaze with gunfire. Smoke curled from the rooftop. A haystack behind the barn was burning. Elias dropped to one knee and fired again. This time he aimed for the officer near the rear, the one barking orders from behind a cluster of men. The shot clipped the man's shoulder. He tumbled from his horse. The cavalry faltered again. But the Comanche were thinning too. A warrior near the barn cried out as a bullet struck his leg. Another young man's rifle misfired, forcing him into hand-to-hand combat with a saber-wielding soldier. It was no longer a battle of tactics, it was survival. Elias crouched behind the water trough beside Chief Waya. "Running low?" Elias asked. Waya didn't answer with words. He held up his hand. 2 fingers. 2 arrows left. Elias checked his pockets. 5 rounds. Maybe 6 if the chamber was full. And then, through the gun smoke and shouts, the sound of hoofbeats. But not from the ridge, from behind. Elias turned. A dozen men on horseback emerged from the trail behind the ranch. Not soldiers, not Comanche. Ranchers. Silas Boone at the front, shotgun in hand. 8 men riding behind him, neighbors from across the valley. Men who'd known Elias for years. And they were staring at him, at the man standing shoulder to shoulder with painted warriors, rifle in hand. One of them reached for his holster. Silas raised his shotgun and barked, "Don't!" The man froze. The cavalry officers saw the ranchers too, confused, caught between allies and accusations. One of them shouted, "This man Whitaker's aiding savages!" Silas raised his voice. "This man's defending his land and the truth. That ain't a crime where I come from." The field fell quiet. No one fired. But then, as tension reached its peak,
Colonel Harwood, face red with fury, rode forward and reached for his pistol. He aimed it squarely at Silas Boone. And that's when it ended. A tomahawk flew, fast, silent, brutal. It struck Harwood in the forehead with a sickening crunch. He toppled from his horse, dead before he hit the ground. Elias turned toward Chief Waya, who stood calmly with his hand still outstretched. No one moved. No one spoke. Because now everyone knew. This battle had just become something far bigger than bullets and blood. It was about honor, justice.
And who truly belonged in the land they all called home? The final choice is upon them. Don't miss what happens next. Hit that subscribe button now. The gunfire faded. The smoke thinned. And for the first time in what felt like hours, the valley held its breath. Elias lowered his rifle slowly. Across the field, soldiers stood frozen in place, unsure whether to reload or run. Some stared at the tomahawk still lodged in Colonel Harwood's skull, his body crumpled in the dirt. Others glanced toward the ranchers, rifles half raised, confused by which way the wind now blew. Silas Boone dismounted, his boots thudding against the dry ground. He looked at Elias. "What the hell happened here, Whitaker?" Elias didn't answer at first. He just looked around. The barn was peppered with bullet holes. Smoke curled from the roof. 2 Comanche warriors lay still in the grass. Others were wounded, bandaging arms, leaning against broken barrels. Nita was still alive inside, but barely. Elias turned back to Silas. They came to kill her, not because she did anything wrong, but because she survived something she wasn't supposed to. Silas's eyes narrowed. "You talking about that girl, the Comanche?" Elias nodded. "She saw who set her up, a traitor. Your army was covering it up. Harwood knew." Boone looked around again. His eyes settled on the cavalry still holding their rifles. Then on the Comanche, too exhausted to fight, too proud to retreat. Finally he spoke. "I ain't fond of war, but I know damn well when a man's being hunted for doing the right thing." He turned to the other ranchers. "We didn't ride here to help no army. We came for Elias, and I say we back him." A few of the men still hesitated, but Boone's voice carried weight. Slowly, one by one, the rifles lowered. No one holstered their guns, but they weren't aimed anymore. Then from the southern road came the distant thunder of hooves. Again. Elias turned. A fresh detachment of riders emerged from the trees, white flag raised high. 20 men, clean uniforms, disciplined formation. No panic, no fury. At their head, a tall man with a white beard, cold eyes, and calm authority. Colonel Amos Ellison. He raised a hand and signaled the halt. Then he dismounted. He didn't bark orders. He didn't threaten. He walked straight toward the center of the bloody, trampled field, between Comanche warriors, armed ranchers, and shaken cavalrymen. When he reached the middle, he looked around. His voice, when it came, was measured, low, but strong. "Colonel Harwood acted without written authorization," he said. "He will be held accountable posthumously." A pause. Then he turned to Elias. "I've read your record, Whitaker. Army Scout, honorable discharge. You were respected." "I was," Elias replied. "Then I tried to save a girl." Ellison nodded once. "And now you've got a bloody ranch, dead soldiers, and a standoff with Comanche on your front lawn. Quite the morning." Chief Waya stepped forward, silent and poised. Ellison looked at him directly. "I can't undo what's been done, but I can stop it from getting worse." He raised his voice slightly, speaking so all could hear. "We record this incident as the result of Harwood's rogue command.
Mr. Whitaker acted in defense of life, not aggression. The Comanche may withdraw in peace, with honor. The field remained silent. No one spoke, because what Ellison had just done was offer everyone a way out. The soldiers wouldn't be punished for standing down. The Comanche wouldn't be labeled murderers. Elias wouldn't be court-martialed. And the dead would stay dead, without triggering a war. It was politics. It was survival. It was compromise. And it was the only way forward. Chief Waya gave a respectful nod. Silas Boone lowered his shotgun and muttered, "Good enough for me." Ellison looked at Elias one last time. "You've made powerful enemies," he said quietly.
"But you've also proven something." "What's that?" Elias asked. Ellison's lips curled into the faintest hint of a smile. That sometimes the right side of history doesn't wear a uniform. Then he turned, mounted his horse, and led his men away. The field remained still. No more gunfire, no more shouting, just wind in the grass and the long, heavy silence of peace hard-earned. The gunfire stopped. Smoke drifted low across the ranch, but the air was far from quiet. Elias Whitaker stood in the middle of it all, sweat-streaked, blood on his sleeve, rifle heavy in his hands. Around him, the field was littered with splinters, spent shells, and the still bodies of the fallen. Colonel Harwood's corpse lay slumped in the dirt, tomahawk still lodged in his skull. And no one, not cavalry, not Comanche, not neighbor, dared speak first. The sudden sound of hoofbeats cracked the silence. From the northern ridge, a group of ranchers rode into view, 12 men, led by Silas Boone, Elias's old friend, his closest neighbor. They'd come armed, ready for war, but not for this. Silas slowed his horse, took in the broken fences, the bodies, the painted warriors still holding rifles, and Elias standing beside them. He dismounted, shotgun in hand. "Elias," he said slowly, "what the hell happened here?" Elias didn't flinch. "The army came for a wounded girl, tried to wipe out the witnesses, and I wasn't about to let them." Silas glanced toward the barn, then at the cavalry still watching from the slope. "You stood with them?" "I stood with the truth," Elias said, "even if it meant standing alone." A low murmur spread through the ranchers. One man, a wiry cattleman named Berkeley, shifted in the saddle, hand drifting toward his revolver. "Don't," Silas snapped. He turned back to the group. "You all know what kind of man Elias is. He's the one who helped me find my boy when he went missing in that storm. Who stayed 3 nights on foot just to bring medicine to old Martha Lane." Silas looked them all in the eye. "You trust the army, or you trust a man who stood beside us for 15 years? Silence. And then, slowly, rifles began to lower. But the moment of fragile peace was short-lived. Another sound cut through the tension. Hooves. But this time, orderly, synchronized, not a charge, not a retreat. From the southern trail, a new group emerged. 24 cavalrymen, clean uniforms, spotless gear. No signs of panic or blood. At the front rode a tall man with silver hair, broad shoulders, and eyes that scanned everything with surgical precision. He carried no saber, only a raised white flag. Elias narrowed his gaze. He recognized the insignia. Colonel Amos Ellison, a man known more for his mind than his fists. And in this valley full of blood and fury, he was riding in with the one thing no one else had dared offer: a chance to end it. Colonel Amos Ellison dismounted without a word. His boots sank into the dust as he stepped between the bodies, the broken fence posts, the scorched earth. He passed Harwood's corpse without a glance, past the Comanche warriors still gripping their weapons,
walked straight toward Elias. Every eye followed him. He stopped 10 feet away, hands empty, posture straight. "I assume you're Elias Whitaker," Ellison said calmly. "I am." "You fired first?" "I did." Ellison nodded once, as if Elias had confirmed the weather. Behind him, his soldiers remained mounted, watching without moving. Ranchers, too, stayed frozen in place. No one trusted the silence. "I read your file," Ellison continued. "Army scout, trapper, honorably discharged, no record of violence, and yet here we are." Elias's voice was steady. "They came for a girl who'd already lost too much. They came to bury the truth." Ellison's eyes drifted to the barn. "The girl is alive?" "Barely." "And the one who betrayed her?" "Dead."
By his own people's hand. The colonel turned slowly, his gaze sweeping over the battlefield. The dead cavalrymen, the fallen Comanche, the ranchers holding their breath. "This is what comes of decisions made in shadows," he said, "of men like Harwood acting with guns instead of judgment." Then he raised his voice, just enough for all sides to hear. "Let this be official. Colonel Harwood acted without orders. His actions do not reflect the command of the U.S. Army." Murmurs spread through the ranks. A few cavalrymen glanced at one another, visibly relieved. Ellison turned back to Elias. "As for you, Mr. Whitaker, your actions may have defied protocol, but they upheld something rarer." He paused. "Honor." Elias didn't reply. He didn't need to. Ellison looked to Chief Waya next. "We've crossed too many lines already, but I offer this. Your warriors may leave in peace. No pursuit, no report." Waya studied him for a long moment, then gave a single, grave nod. Ellison turned once more, this time to everyone. "We record this day not as rebellion, but as resolution. The fighting ends here. There will be no trials, no war." And then, in a tone just loud enough for history to remember, "Sometimes the law lags behind what's right, but not today." The field remained silent. Then Silas Boone holstered his weapon. "Sounds like a deal worth keeping." Others followed suit. One by one, rifles were slung, bows unstrung, horses reined in. The battle was over. Not with surrender, not with victory, but with something far rarer in the wild lands of the West: understanding. Ellison mounted his horse again, lifted the white flag high, and turned toward the trail. Behind him, no one spoke. But something had shifted, permanently. In a land soaked in blood and pride, the impossible had just happened. They had chosen peace. The dust hadn't yet settled, but the killing had stopped.
Colonel Amos Ellison remained on horseback, the white flag fluttering above him like a ghost refusing to leave. He looked out across the ruined field, at the broken fences, the torn earth, the blood-stained wood of Elias Whitaker's ranch. Behind him, his officers waited for a command, but there was none to give. He turned once more to Elias. "You've made enemies," he said plainly, "powerful ones." Elias, still clutching Sarah's Winchester, gave a tired nod. "That's nothing new." Ellison exhaled, slow and steady. "You've also made something rarer than friends." "What's that?" Ellison's gaze drifted to Chief Waya, who stood quietly beside his warriors. "Witnesses," he said, "to a kind of courage that can't be trained or ordered." He reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a sealed document. He handed it to Elias without ceremony. "Official pardon," he said, "signed this morning by Fort Brenning's adjutant. We suspected Harwood was overstepping. We were right, just not fast enough." Elias didn't take it right away. He looked down at the seal, the eagle, the ink, then up at the girl stepping from the barn, Nita, pale, weak, but standing. The healer supported her by the arm. Her feet touched the scorched earth. Her eyes scanned the scene. And when they met Elias's, she smiled. She had survived, because someone had finally chosen to do the hard thing. Ellison followed her gaze. That girl's testimony, if ever needed, could shatter more than one man's career. Elias looked him in the eye. "You afraid of that? I'm afraid of what happens when no one listens to her." The colonel's voice dropped. "There's a war brewing, Whitaker, not with rifles and horses, but with memory and silence. And men like you may not win medals, but you might just stop it from spreading." He reined his horse. The conversation was over, but the echo would remain. He turned toward Chief Waya, offered a shallow bow from the saddle. Waya returned the gesture. It wasn't trust, but it was respect. Ellison raised his hand. His troops turned, and the white flag, now stained with ash and dust, led the column back down the trail, away from the blood, away from the line they'd nearly crossed. And just like that, they were gone. Elias stood for a long time, watching the dust trail vanish into the canyon. Behind him, Silas Boone walked up. "Wasn't the ending I expected," Silas said. "No," Elias replied. "It was better." He looked around at the quiet Comanche warriors gathering their fallen, the barns still standing, the mountains beyond, still untouched. "What now?" Silas asked. Elias exhaled. "Now we rebuild, and we remember." Because the West wouldn't remember this day in newspapers or medals. It would live in the silence that followed the gunfire, in the girl who survived, in the ground that didn't soak in more blood than it already had, and in one man's choice to do what was right when no one else would. The smoke had cleared, the blood had dried, and for the first time in days, the wind that passed through the Rio Mesa carried no threat, only silence. Elias stood on his porch, arms crossed, eyes watching the horizon. The sun was dipping low behind the buttes, turning the land gold and rust, the kind of light Sarah used to love. Behind him, the ranch was quiet. No more gunfire, no more screaming horses, only the faint clatter of hooves in the stable and the soft breathing of someone still healing. Nita. She had refused to leave, not because she couldn't, but because she wouldn't. Under Comanche custom, she was permitted to choose a guardian during recovery, someone to protect and host her during her healing. She'd made her choice without hesitation. She'd chosen Elias. It wasn't spoken aloud in the barn that night. Just a glance, a nod, and that quiet strength in her eyes that told him, "You saved me once. Now let me stay until I can save myself." Elias had said yes. He wasn't sure why at first, but day by day, it became clearer. They worked in silence most mornings. She fed the cattle. He mended fences. They taught each other names for things, Comanche words for wind and fire, English words for loss and hope. She asked about Sarah once. He didn't say much, but he showed her a locket, a small silver thing still carrying the face of the woman he'd buried 3 years ago. Nita didn't pry. She only listened. Later that night, she showed him a necklace of her own, woven leather, red beads, an eagle's feather in the center. "My mother gave this to me," she said, "before the fire, before the war." They sat in silence for a while. Different losses, same pain. That was how trust was built, not with promises, but with presence. A week passed, then 2. The fever broke, her strength returned, but something deeper had changed. One morning, Chief Waya came to the ranch, alone. No warriors, no weapons, just a pouch in his hand and a long shadow behind him. He said nothing when Elias opened the door, simply nodded, then handed him the pouch. It was made of deer hide, stitched with bone and copper beads.
a single hawk feather tucked inside. Elias turned it over in his hands. "What is this?" Waya spoke softly. "It was mine, a medicine bag. Now it is something new." He looked at Nita, standing tall beside Elias. "We call it Oath Talisman. From this day, your home is known to us as sacred ground. Not Comanche, not white, but between." Elias said nothing, but he felt it, heavy in his chest, like something ancient had shifted, not erased, but rewritten. Waya placed a hand on Elias's shoulder. "You are no longer stranger." And with that, the chief turned and rode into the wind. That night, Elias hung the oath talisman above the front door, right next to Sarah's locket. 2 pieces of the past, 2 promises for the future. And for the first time in years, the ranch didn't feel like a memory. It felt like a beginning. Seasons changed. Snow melted into spring. Spring ripened into harvest.
And with each passing month, the story of the Rio Mesa ranch spread, not as a tale of war, but as a whisper of peace. Nita didn't return to her tribe right away. She stayed through the summer, and by fall, she began receiving visitors, tribal elders, translators, and eventually, government men. They didn't come with rifles anymore. They came with ledgers, with questions, with needs. Because word had reached Washington. A young Comanche woman, survivor of an ambush, was speaking in 2 tongues now, English and Comanche. And she spoke not with anger, but with clarity, with purpose. They listened, and soon she was asked to speak on behalf of her people, to mediate, to explain, to translate not just words, but worlds. Nita became something rare, a bridge. She never asked for the title, never claimed leadership, but people followed her voice because it carried the weight of truth. And Elias? He stayed on the ranch, kept to his ways. But something had changed in how the land looked at him, and how people did too. No longer just a farmer, he became neutral ground. A white man trusted by Comanche elders, a quiet presence in tense negotiations. The only settler allowed to ride into sacred land without an escort. His ranch became more than a home. It became a meeting place, a space where cattle were traded and peace was negotiated, a quiet outpost where men could talk before they drew guns. They called it the Mesa Line. A fence that once marked division now marked dialogue. And Elias never took down the oath talisman. He kept it above the door, next to the locket. A reminder that sometimes the smallest gestures, a saved life, a shared meal, a single word spoken in kindness, could ripple through generations. Because the West wasn't tamed by bullets, not really. It was tamed by people who chose to listen when everyone else shouted. Sometimes the right choice is the hardest one. Elias Whitaker knew that when he opened his barn door to a bleeding girl. He knew it when 50 warriors rode down on his land. And he knew it when he picked up his wife's rifle, not to seek revenge, but to protect what was right. He didn't do it for glory, didn't do it for forgiveness. He did it because somewhere deep inside he still believed in the possibility of peace, even in a place soaked in grief. And that's the truth we so often forget. Saving one life can spark a war, but it can also end one. When Elias stood between a wounded girl and a world that wanted her gone, he made a choice. And that choice changed everything. It built a bridge where there had been only fire. It carved a path between enemies who had only known blood. It gave 2 broken hearts, Elias and Nita, a chance to heal. Because courage isn't always loud. Sometimes it's quiet, patient, steady. Sometimes it looks like standing your ground, even when your hands are shaking. That's how legends are born, not with a gunshot, but with a choice.
The story of Elias Whitaker reminds us that the Wild West wasn't just built by outlaws and gunmen, but also by quiet, stubborn souls who chose mercy over bloodshed. In a time where hatred was inherited and fear was law, one man proved that doing what's right might not change the world overnight, but it can change everything around you. Elias didn't set out to be a hero. He just refused to let another innocent die. And sometimes that's where true courage begins, not with a badge or a bullet, but with compassion. If you found something powerful in this story, wait until you hear what happened 2 winters later, when a young outlaw rode into the Mesa line carrying a secret that could destroy everything Elias had built, or save hundreds of lives. Because in the untamed frontier, the choices never stop, and neither do the consequences. Subscribe now and follow us for more true Wild West stories, tales of grit, honor, sacrifice, and the kind of bravery that history books forget, but hearts remember.